The rifle barrel pressed cold against Rowan Hale's temple as Grant Callister's voice cut through the Montana wind. This land ain't hers to keep, and it sure as hell ain't yours to defend. But Rowan had already decided he'd rather die protecting this woman and her children than ride away like he'd done from every other good thing in his life. 3 months ago, he'd been a drifter with nothing. Now he had everything to lose. This is how a cowboy found his family, and how that family nearly got him killed. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Now settle in, because this is just the beginning. The Montana sky stretched endless and indifferent the day Rowan Hale first saw the woman who would change everything. It was late April, and the land was still shaking off winter's grip, patches of snow clinging stubbornly to the shadows of ravines while new grass pushed through the thawing earth. Rowan had been riding for 3 days straight, his horse tired, his supplies running low, his purpose unclear even to himself. He'd left the cavalry scouts 6 months prior, honorably discharged after taking Confederate shrapnel in his shoulder during the war's final senseless skirmishes. The wound had healed crooked, leaving his left arm weaker than it used to be, and his sleep plagued by the faces of boys, both blue and gray, who'd never made it home. He drifted through Wyoming, Colorado, and now Montana, taking odd jobs when he needed money, moving on when the memories got too loud. The homestead appeared like a mirage through the cottonwoods along the creek. Rowan almost rode past, but his horse caught the scent of water and turned its head, ears pricking forward. He gave the animal its head, following the narrow trail through the trees until the land opened up into a small valley. That's when he saw her. She stood in the yard between a weathered cabin and a lean-to barn, hanging laundry on a line strung between 2 posts. The wind caught the sheets, making them snap and billow like sails, and she moved with practiced efficiency. Wooden pins held between her teeth as she worked. Her hair, the color of honey in sunlight, was pulled back in a loose braid that hung to her waist, and she wore a simple dress of faded blue calico. The sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms tanned by sun and work. But it wasn't the woman alone that stopped Rowan cold. It was the children. A boy, maybe 8 years old, was chopping wood near the cabin, or trying to. His technique was terrible, the axe too heavy for his thin arms, but he attacked each log with determined ferocity. A few feet away, a little girl of perhaps 5 sat in the dirt, arranging a collection of stones into some pattern only she understood, humming a tune that carried faintly across the yard. The whole scene hit Rowan like a fist to his chest. Something about the way the afternoon light fell across them, the simple domestic rhythm of their movements, the sense of home that radiated from that small clearing, it woke a hunger in him he hadn't known he still carried. He'd been running from connection for so long, he'd forgotten what it looked like when people belonged to each other. The woman spotted him then. Her hands stilled on the sheet she was pinning, and her body tensed in that particular way of frontier women who'd learned to be wary. Her eyes, even from 30 yards away, he could see they were sharp, swept over him, taking inventory. The Confederate cavalry coat he still wore because it was the warmest thing he owned, the Colt revolver on his hip, the bedroll and saddlebags that marked him as a drifter, the 3-day beard and trail dust that marked him as a stranger. "Tommy," she called, her voice carrying clear and controlled. "Inside." The boy straightened immediately, abandoning his axe. "Mama?" "Now, please." There was no panic in her tone, but there was unmistakable authority. The boy grabbed his little sister's hand. She protested, her stones forgotten, and guided her toward the cabin. They disappeared inside, but Rowan caught the boy's face in the doorway, watching. The woman didn't move toward the cabin. Instead, she reached behind her and produced a shotgun that had been leaning against the laundry basket. She didn't aim it at Rowan, but she held it ready, finger near the trigger guard. Smart woman. Rowan stopped his horse a respectful distance away and raised his hands slowly, keeping them visible. "Ma'am," he called, "I don't mean any trouble. Just following the creek, hoping to water my horse and refill my canteen. I can pay." She studied him for a long moment. The wind moved through the cottonwoods, and a crow called from somewhere upstream. Rowan kept his hands up, letting her look her fill. He knew what she was seeing, a man weathered by war and miles, too thin under his coat, but with steady eyes that met hers without threat or presumption. "Where you headed?" she finally asked. "North," Rowan said. It was the truth, as much truth as he had. Looking for work. Maybe something in the mining camps near Helena, or ranch work if I can find it. You ride for the Callister outfit? The question was sharp, loaded with something Rowan didn't understand. No, ma'am. Don't know the name. Some of the tension left her shoulders. The shotgun lowered slightly, though she didn't put it down. Creek's there, she said, nodding to the water visible through the trees. Help yourself. There's a good spot just downstream where the bank's flat. Appreciate it, Rowan said. He started to turn his horse, then paused. Ma'am? I haven't had a decent meal in 3 days. I've got a bit of money, or I could work for food. I'm handy with repairs, good with animals, and I can chop wood proper. No offense to your boy, but he's going to hurt himself with that axe if someone doesn't teach him different. He saw the flicker of something cross her face, pride maybe, or pain, or just the exhaustion of doing everything alone. When she spoke again, her voice was harder. I don't know you. No, ma'am, you don't. Name's Rowan Hale. Served as a scout in the cavalry, discharged 6 months back. Before that, I worked ranches in Texas and Kansas. I can give you references, but truth is, most of those ranches are probably gone now or under different ownership. He kept his voice even, factual. I'm just a man who's tired and hungry and willing to work for a meal, but I understand if that's not enough. The woman regarded him for another long moment. Rowan could almost see her weighing risks, calculating odds. A lone woman with children on an isolated homestead had to be careful. Inviting a stranger onto her property could mean disaster, but turning away honest help could mean something else, slower, but just as dangerous in its own way. My name is Lydia Brecker, she finally said. My husband died last fall. It's just me and my children now. I've got stew on the stove and there's cornbread from this morning. After you water your horse, you can fix the gate on the chicken coop. Storm tore it half off last week and I haven't had time to mend it proper. Do that, and you can eat. Then you ride on. Clear? Yes, ma'am, clear. She nodded once, then turned and walked back toward the cabin, taking the shotgun with her. She didn't look back, but Rowan noticed she left the cabin door open a crack. Watching. He took his horse down to the creek and let the animal drink its fill while he refilled his canteen. The water ran clear and cold over smooth stones, and he took a moment to splash his face, scrub some of the trail dust from his neck. Upstream, he could see where someone had built a small dam to create a pool for washing. Good setup. Whoever Lydia's husband had been, he'd chosen his land well. Water, timber, good grazing in the valley, protection from the worst winds. And someone wanted it. That question about the Callister outfit hadn't been idle. Rowan led his horse back to the yard and found the chicken coop. The gate hung at an angle, one leather hinge torn completely through, the other barely holding. The chickens had learned to hop over the low point, but it was only a matter of time before a fox or coyote figured out the same trick. He unsaddled his horse, hobbled it in a patch of grass, and set to work. He'd just finished cutting a new hinge from a piece of leather strap in his saddlebag when the boy appeared at his elbow. Rowan hadn't heard him approach. The kid was quiet, and he looked up to find those solemn young eyes studying him. You really know how to chop wood? The boy asked. Rowan sat back on his heels. I do. You Tommy. Thomas, the boy corrected, drawing himself up straighter. Tommy's a baby name. Thomas, then. That's a good, strong name. Rowan wiped his hands on his pants. I'm Rowan. Nice to meet you properly. Thomas looked at the gate, at Rowan's handiwork. That's better than what Papa did. He wasn't very good at fixing things. He was better at numbers and reading. Mama said he had an educated mind. There was no grief in the boy's voice, just statement of fact. But Rowan caught the past tense, the way the child had already learned to speak of his father as something finished. An educated mind is valuable, Rowan said carefully. But out here, you need both kinds of smart. Are you both kinds? Rowan considered the question. I can read and cipher well enough, and I can build most things that need building. Still learning, though. Always something new to figure out. Thomas nodded, processing this. Would you teach me to chop wood the right way? Before Rowan could answer, Lydia's voice cut across the yard. Thomas, don't bother Mr. Hale. He's got work to do. Yes, Mama. But Thomas didn't move immediately. He lowered his voice, meant just for Rowan. She won't ask for help even when she needs it. She thinks asking makes her weak, but I see her crying sometimes at night when she thinks we're asleep." The words hit Rowan like another fist to the chest. This child, trying to be the man of the house, carrying weights no 8-year-old should carry. "Thomas," Rowan said quietly, "taking care of your mama and your sister, that's the strongest thing a person can do. Don't let anyone tell you different, but you don't have to do it alone. Sometimes accepting help is its own kind of strength." Thomas looked at him for a long moment, then nodded and ran back toward the cabin. Rowan finished the gate and tested it. Solid. The chickens would be safe tonight, at least from the predators with 4 legs. He was putting his tools away when Lydia called from the cabin doorway. "It's ready. Come eat." The cabin was small but clean, one main room with a sleeping loft above. A cook stove sat against one wall, a rough-hewn table with 4 mismatched chairs in the center. The walls were chinked tight against the wind, and someone, probably Lydia, had sewn curtains for the 2 small windows. A few books lined a shelf near the table, more than most frontier homes had. Thomas and his little sister, June, Rowan learned, sat at the table, hands folded, waiting. Lydia ladled stew into bowls, the smell of venison and root vegetables making Rowan's stomach clench with hunger. She set a bowl in front of him, along with a chunk of cornbread, then served her children before sitting down herself. "We say grace," she said, and bowed her head. Rowan bowed his too, listening to her voice as she gave thanks for the food, for safety, for the day's blessings. When she finished, June piped up with an enthusiastic "Amen!" and immediately attacked her stew. For a few minutes, they ate in silence. The stew was good, not fancy, but made with care and seasoned well. The cornbread had a bit of molasses in it, sweet against the savory stew. Rowan ate slowly, making it last, aware of 3 pairs of eyes watching him. "The gate's fixed," he said finally. "Should hold through the summer, at least. You'll want to check those leather hinges before winter. Maybe replace them with metal if you can get some." "Thank you," Lydia said. "There's a little smithy in town, but their prices—" She trailed off, then straightened her shoulders. "I'll manage." "Mama makes everything," June announced proudly. "She makes bread and soap and candles and fixes our clothes, and she killed a snake this big." The little girl spread her arms as wide as they would go. "June, eat your supper," Lydia said, but there was warmth in her voice. "Did you really scout in the war?" Thomas asked Rowan. "Did you shoot people?" "Thomas!" "It's all right," Rowan said. He looked at the boy. "I did scout. That means I rode ahead of the army, looking for enemy positions, finding safe routes for our men to travel. Sometimes there was shooting. I tried not to kill anyone if I could help it, but in war, you don't always get a choice." He paused. "It's not something I'm proud of. War isn't glory, like the songs say. It's mostly just waste and grief." Thomas absorbed this solemnly. "Papa didn't fight. He had bad lungs. He said he felt guilty about it." "No one should feel guilty for surviving," Rowan said. "Your father was here, building this place, keeping your family fed and safe. That's its own kind of service." Lydia's eyes met his across the table, and for just a moment, her guard dropped. He saw the grief there, still raw, and the loneliness and the fear she worked so hard to hide from her children. Then she looked away, focusing on her bowl. "Where are your people, Mr. Hale?" she asked. "Gone, mostly. Parents died of cholera when I was 16. Had a brother who went west to California in '49, never heard from him again. Might be dead, might be rich, might be anything." Rowan shrugged. "I've been on my own a long time." "No wife?" "No, ma'am. Came close once, before the war, but she married someone else while I was gone. Can't blame her. 4 years is a long time to wait, and I was different when I came back. Harder, I suppose. Less sure of things." "The war changed everyone," Lydia said quietly. They finished the meal, and Lydia served coffee. Real coffee, not the chicory substitute most folks made do with. Rowan savored it, knowing it had probably cost her dearly. June had climbed down from her chair and was showing him her collection of stones, explaining in breathless detail which ones were which, and why this one was special because it was shaped like a heart, and that one was magic because she'd found it on her birthday. "June, Mr. Hale doesn't need to hear about every rock you've ever found," Lydia said, but she was smiling slightly. "I don't mind," Rowan said, and meant it. He listened as June talked, As Thomas asked more questions about horses and tracking and whether Rowan had ever seen a grizzly bear. He watched Lydia clear the dishes, moving with efficiency born of months of doing everything herself. The cabin felt warm, lived in, full of the particular texture that came from people who loved each other. And Rowan felt that hunger again, sharper now. The wanting of something he'd never really had, even as a child. The sense of being part of something larger than his own survival. When the meal was finished and the dishes washed, Lydia walked him outside. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. His horse had grazed itself content and stood dozing in the evening cool. "Thank you for the meal," Rowan said, "and for trusting me enough to let me eat at your table." "You did good work," Lydia said. "Fair trade." She hesitated, then added, "If you're still looking for work tomorrow, I could use help with other things. The barn roof leaks in 2 places. There's a section of fence down on the north pasture, and Thomas—" She trailed off. "Thomas needs someone to teach him things his father didn't know," Rowan finished gently. "Yes." The admission seemed to cost her something. "I can't pay much, room and board, and a little cash when I have it, but I won't ask you to stay if you've got somewhere else to be." Rowan looked at the cabin, at the smoke rising from the chimney, at the land spread out around them. He thought about the road north to Helena, about the mining camps and saloons, and the endless moving that had been his life for so long. And he thought about June's excited chatter, and Thomas's solemn questions, and Lydia's guarded hope. "I don't have anywhere else to be," he said. "If you'll have me, I'll stay on a while. Help get things in order." Relief flickered across her face, quickly masked. "You can sleep in the barn. There's a tack room that's fairly clean. I'll bring blankets. I've slept in worse." She nodded, then met his eyes directly. "Mr. Hale, I need to be clear about something. I'm grateful for the help, truly, but this is temporary. I'm not looking for a husband, and my children don't need a father figure who's going to disappear when the wind changes. So if you're staying as hired help, nothing more." "Understood," Rowan said, and meant it. He could hear the steel in her voice, the boundary she was drawing. She'd been hurt by loss and was protecting her children from more of it. He respected that. "I give you my word. I'll work hard. I won't overstep. And when it's time to move on, I'll do it clean." "Good." She turned to go, then paused. "And Mr. Hale? I sleep light, and I'm a good shot. Just so we're clear on that too." Rowan couldn't help the small smile that tugged at his mouth. "Wouldn't expect anything less, Mrs. Brecker." She almost smiled back. He saw it ghost across her face, then disappeared into the cabin. Rowan led his horse to the barn, found the tack room Lydia had mentioned. It was small but dry, with space enough for his bedroll and gear. Through the wall, he could hear the soft sounds of the animals settling for the night. 2 cows, a few goats, the chickens roosting in their coop. He was spreading his blankets when Lydia appeared with an armful of quilts. "It gets cold at night still," she said, setting them down. "These should help." "Thank you." She lingered in the doorway, backlit by the last of the sunset. "Why did you really stop here, Mr. Hale? There are dozens of homesteads along this creek. Why this one?" Rowan considered lying, offering some practical reason, but something in her direct gaze demanded honesty. "I saw you with your children," he said simply, "hanging laundry while they played, and it looked like the kind of thing worth stopping for. Worth staying for, maybe." Lydia's expression was unreadable. "Be careful what you wish for," she said quietly. "This life isn't as simple as it looks from the road. And nothing worthwhile ever is." She studied him for another moment, then nodded and left. Rowan heard her cross the yard, heard the cabin door close. Through the barn's open door, he could see lamplight glowing in the cabin windows. He lay down on his bedroll, pulled the quilts over himself. They smelled like lye soap and sunshine, clean and domestic. Through the wall, one of the cows shifted and sighed. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote called, and another answered. For the first time in months, maybe years, Rowan Hale felt something besides restlessness as he closed his eyes. He felt possibility. He didn't know then what was coming, didn't know about Grant Callister and his hunger for this land, didn't know how much blood would be spilled before this story reached its end. Didn't know that the simple domestic scene that had drawn him off the road would become the thing he'd fight for, kill for, if necessary, the thing he'd finally allow himself to call home. All he knew, drifting off to sleep in a stranger's barn, was that he'd stopped running, at least for now. And sometimes that was enough to start with. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the kind of spring day that promised warmth by noon but started with frost on the grass. Rowan woke at first light, habit from his cavalry days, and found his muscles stiff from sleeping on the ground, even with the quilts. He was getting too old for this kind of comfort, though he'd die before admitting it to anyone. He could hear movement from the cabin, Lydia up and working, the quiet sounds of breakfast being prepared. He rolled up his bedroll, splashed cold water on his face from the horse trough, and was examining the barn roof when Thomas appeared, carrying a steaming cup. "Mama said to bring you coffee," the boy said, "and to tell you breakfast is in 20 minutes. Rowan took the cup gratefully. The coffee was hot and strong, chasing the chill from his bones. "Your mama's a good woman," he said. "I know," Thomas said. He looked up at the roof where Rowan was studying. "That's where it leaks. When it rains, we have to put buckets in the aisle between the stalls." "I see it. The shingles are split there and there. Should be an easy fix if your mama's got spare wood. There's some behind the barn. Papa bought it last summer but never got around to it." Again, that matter-of-fact tone, the child stating simple truth without judgment or grief. "Well then, I'll get started after breakfast. Want to help?" Thomas's face lit up. "Really?" "Sure. I'll need someone to hand me shingles and hold the ladder steady. That's an important job." The boy practically vibrated with pride. "I can do that. I'm strong." "I can see that." Rowan drained his coffee. "Come on, let's go see what your mama's cooking." Breakfast was hotcakes and bacon, probably the last of their winter stores, Rowan guessed. June chattered about a dream she'd had involving flying horses and castles made of clouds. Thomas ate quickly, already focused on the roof project. Lydia was quiet, watching Rowan with that same assessing gaze from the day before. "After the roof, I thought I'd ride out and check that fence line you mentioned," Rowan said. "See what materials we'll need for repairs." "We?" Lydia's voice was carefully neutral. "Figure of speech, ma'am. Force of habit from working with crews." He met her eyes. "I know this is your place. Just offering my assessment when you're ready for it." She relaxed fractionally. "All right, the fence is about 2 miles north. You'll see where it's down. Took out about 50 feet during a winter storm. I've been keeping the cattle close to the barn because of it, but they need to graze properly." "How many head do you have?" 10. "And 2 calves born last month." She poured herself more coffee. "It's not much, but it's enough to get us through if I can get them to market in the fall." 10 head is a good start," Rowan said. "My father ran 40 head in Texas, and he thought he was a cattle baron." Lydia almost smiled at that. They spent the morning on the roof. Rowan worked while Thomas handed him shingles, held the ladder, and asked a constant stream of questions. The boy was sharp, Rowan realized, quick to understand when Rowan explained why the shingles overlapped a certain way, how to read the slope of a roof to know where water would flow. "You're a natural at this," Rowan told him, and Thomas glowed. By noon, the roof was patched. Not perfect. Rowan would have preferred to replace the whole section, but it would hold through the summer rains. They climbed down and Lydia brought out lunch, bread and cheese and cold meat from breakfast. "It looks good," she said, examining their work. "Better than I could have done." "Thomas did most of it," Rowan said, and the boy's chest puffed out. "I just supervised." Lydia's eyes met Rowan's over her son's head, and he saw gratitude there, mixed with something more complicated. She understood what he was doing, building the boy up, giving him pride in his work, and she appreciated it even as it must have hurt to acknowledge what Thomas had been missing. After lunch, Rowan saddled his horse and rode north to inspect the fence. The damage was worse than he'd expected, not just knocked down but uprooted, posts torn from the ground by some combination of wind and snow. He'd need new posts, new wire, maybe 2 full days of work. He was examining one of the broken posts when he heard hoofbeats. 3 riders appeared over the rise, moving fast. Rowan's hand went instinctively to his revolver, then relaxed when he saw they were heading for Lydia's cabin. Not for him. He turned his horse and followed at a distance. By the time he reached the yard, the three men had dismounted. They were well dressed by frontier standards: good boots, quality guns, horses that hadn't missed many meals. The man in front was older, maybe 50, with silver threading his dark hair and the kind of easy confidence that came from always getting his way. Lydia stood on the cabin porch, Thomas beside her. June was nowhere in sight. Hidden inside, Rowan guessed. Smart. Lydia's shotgun was visible just inside the door. "Mrs. Brecker," the silver-haired man was saying as Rowan approached. "I was hoping we could talk business." "Mr. Callister," Lydia's voice was ice. "I thought I made my position clear the last time you were here." Callister. So this was the man she'd asked about yesterday. "Now, let's be reasonable," Callister said, his tone patronizing. "A woman alone trying to run a homestead? That's a hard life, Mrs. Brecker. No shame in admitting when something's too much." "I'm managing fine." "Are you? Because from where I stand, I see a barn with a leaking roof, fences down, and winter stores that must be nearly gone." He spread his hands, the picture of concern. "I'm offering you a fair price for this land. More than fair, considering the work it would need. You could take that money, move into town, give your children a proper life. Maybe even find yourself another husband, someone to take care of you." Rowan saw Lydia's hands clench, saw Thomas move closer to his mother, and he saw the two men flanking Callister rest their hands on their gun belts, casual-like, but the message was clear. "The land isn't for sale," Lydia said. "Not at any price. This is our home, Mr. Callister. My husband built it, and I intend to keep it." "Your husband is dead." Callister's voice lost its false warmth. "And dead men don't file claims or pay taxes or protect what's theirs. You're sitting on prime grazing land with year-round water access. My cattle need that creek, Mrs. Brecker. One way or another, I'm going to have it." That's when Rowan rode into the yard. "Afternoon," he said mildly, dismounting. He moved to stand between Callister's men and the porch, casual-like, his hand near his gun. "Didn't mean to interrupt. Just getting back from checking the north fence." Callister's eyes narrowed. "And who might you be?" "Rowan Hale. I work for Mrs. Brecker." "Since when?" "Since yesterday." "Why? You keeping track of her business?" One of Callister's men stepped forward, but Callister raised a hand, stopping him. "Easy, Davis. I'm sure Mr. Hale here doesn't understand the situation." He turned his attention back to Rowan. "This is a private conversation about a business matter, no concern of yours." "Seems like it is my concern, given I'm standing on Mrs. Brecker's property and you're making her uncomfortable." Rowan's voice stayed mild, but his eyes were hard. "She said the land isn't for sale. Seems pretty clear to me." "You don't know what you're getting into, boy." Callister's voice carried a warning now. "I own most of this valley. I've got 40 men working for me, and I've got friends in the territorial government. Some drifter wearing a Confederate coat isn't going to change how this plays out." "Maybe not," Rowan agreed. "But I reckon you didn't ride out here with your men to make friendly conversation. And I reckon Mrs. Brecker would have used that shotgun already if she wasn't concerned about her children seeing it. So here's what I think. You should get back on your horses and ride out. You want to talk business, you can send a letter like civilized folk. But you don't come onto a widow's land with armed men and threats. Not while I'm here." The silence stretched taut. Rowan could feel his heart beating steady and slow, the old cavalry calm settling over him. He'd faced worse than this: Confederate raiders, Comanche war parties, desperate men with nothing to lose. 3 well-fed ranchers didn't scare him much. Callister studied him for a long moment, then smiled without humor. "You're making a mistake, Mr. Hale, but I suppose you'll figure that out on your own." He turned back to Lydia. "Mrs. Brecker, my offer stands, but it won't stand forever. Think about your children. Think about what's best for them." He swung back onto his horse. His men followed suit, though Davis shot Rowan a look that promised future trouble. They rode out at a canter, dust rising behind them. Rowan watched until they crested the rise and disappeared. Only then did he turn to find Lydia staring at him, her face pale. "You shouldn't have done that," she said. "You don't know what you've just stepped into." "Maybe not," Rowan said, "but I know bullying when I see it, and I know a woman trying to protect her home." He looked at Thomas, who was watching him with wide eyes. Besides, I don't much like men who threaten children. Lydia's expression was complicated, anger and gratitude and fear all mixed together. Grant Callister owns the Lazy Sea Ranch, biggest spread in this territory. He's got money, power, and no conscience to speak of. My husband stood up to him once and... She stopped abruptly, glancing at Thomas. And now your husband's dead, Rowan finished quietly. The doctor said it was pneumonia, but her voice wavered. Rowan understood then, the shape of it. A convenient death right before winter, leaving a widow alone. Maybe it was pneumonia. Or maybe Callister had found a way to make it look like pneumonia. Either way, the man thought he had a clear path now. Well, Rowan said, I reckon Callister's going to find out I'm harder to get rid of than your husband was. No disrespect to the dead. You can't fight him, Lydia said. He'll destroy you. Maybe, but I've been destroyed before. I got up. He met her eyes. I gave you my word I'd stay and help. That includes helping with men like Callister. If you'll let me. Lydia looked at her son, at her cabin, at the land stretching around them. When she spoke again, her voice was stronger. The north fence needs 50 feet of new line and at least a dozen posts. There's timber on the back 40 we can use if you know how to fell trees proper. And after that, the barn needs mucking out, and the tack needs mending, and there's 100 other things falling apart faster than I can fix them. It wasn't agreement, exactly. But it wasn't refusal either. I'll start on the timber tomorrow, Rowan said. Make posts and rails both. Should have that fence up inside a week. Thomas tugged on his mother's sleeve. Can I help Mr. Hale? Please? Lydia looked down at her son, and something in her face softened. If Mr. Hale doesn't mind the company. I'd welcome it, Rowan said. June appeared in the doorway, having apparently deemed it safe to emerge. Are the bad men gone? They're gone, sweetheart, Lydia said, scooping her daughter up. Everything's all right now. But her eyes met Rowan's over the little girl's head, and they both knew it wasn't all right. Not really. They'd just bought themselves some time, but Grant Callister wasn't the kind of man who took no for an answer. That night, after supper, venison stew again, stretched with more vegetables and less meat this time, Rowan sat outside the barn, watching the stars emerge. He could hear Lydia singing to her children through the cabin window, some old lullaby his own mother had sung once upon a time. He'd told Lydia the truth. He'd been destroyed before and got up. What he hadn't told her was that he'd never had a reason to get up, not really. He'd survived because survival was habit, because dying seemed like too much effort. But now, sitting in the darkness with that lullaby drifting across the yard and his muscles pleasantly sore from honest work, Rowan felt something shift inside him. A reason, maybe. Or the beginning of one. He thought about Thomas's proud smile when they'd finished the roof, about June's stone collection and her absolute certainty that one of them was magic, about Lydia's fierce determination to keep her home, to protect her children, to stand against a man who could crush her with a word to the right people. He thought about family, about belonging, about all the things he'd run from for so long because wanting them hurt worse than having nothing at all. And he thought about Grant Callister, about the veiled threats and the implications, about a convenient death during winter and a widow left alone. Rowan had been a lot of things in his life: soldier, scout, drifter, survivor. He'd killed men when he had to, saved men when he could, and walked away from both without looking back. But tomorrow, he'd start cutting timber for fence posts. He'd teach Thomas the proper way to swing an axe. He'd help Lydia hold on to the home her husband had built, and she'd fought to keep. And if Grant Callister came back, well, Rowan had survived worse than a rich rancher with a mean streak. He just hoped, as he finally headed into the barn to sleep, that survival would be enough. Because somewhere in the last day and a half, he'd started wanting more than that. He'd started wanting to stay. The timber work started before dawn the next morning, when the air still held that particular stillness that came just before the world woke up. Rowan had his axe sharpened and ready, his gloves on, and was halfway to the back 40 when he heard footsteps behind him. Thomas, dressed in clothes still too big for his thin frame, carrying his father's old axe with both hands. "Mama said I could come if I promised to do exactly what you told me," the boy said, slightly breathless from hurrying. Rowan looked at him for a moment, then nodded. "First rule of timber work, never swing an axe when you're tired. Second rule, always know where everyone else is standing. Third rule, respect the tree. It's giving its life for your fence, so you don't waste it. Yes, sir. Thomas's face was solemn, taking it in like gospel. They walked together through the meadow grass, still wet with dew, toward the stand of pines Lydia had mentioned. Good straight timber, Rowan saw as they approached. Her husband might not have been handy with repairs, but he'd known land. This was prime building wood, and there was enough of it to supply fence posts for years if managed right. Rowan selected a tree, showed Thomas how to judge it, looking for straightness, checking for disease, making sure the fall path was clear. Then he took his position and began to chop. The rhythm came back to him easy, muscle memory from years of work before the war. The axe bit deep, wood chips flying, the sharp scent of pine sap filling the air. Thomas watched, entranced, until Rowan paused to rest. Now you try, Rowan said, but with a smaller tree. That one there, see it? Good thickness for fence rails. He positioned Thomas, adjusted his grip, showed him how to use his whole body instead of just his arms. The boy's first few swings were awkward, but he learned fast. By the time the sun was fully up, Thomas had felled his first tree, small, but his own work, and was grinning with pride. Can we bring it back to show Mama? We'll bring them all back, Rowan said. But first let's get my tree down, then we'll trim these properly and drag them home. They worked through the morning, stopping once when Lydia appeared with a basket containing bread, cheese, and a jar of water. She watched her son working alongside Rowan, watched the careful way Rowan guided without taking over, and something in her expression softened. You're good with him, she said quietly, while Thomas was examining their fallen trees. He's a good boy, smart, wants to learn. His father loved him, but she trailed off. John was a schoolteacher back in Illinois. Books and numbers came natural to him. But this? She gestured at the timber, the land. He tried. He really did. But he was always sick, the consumption, the doctors said, and by the end, you don't have to explain, Rowan said gently. I think I do. She looked at him directly. John came west because he thought the air would cure him. We filed the homestead claim, built the cabin, started the herd. For 2 years he fought to make it work, even as he got weaker. When Grant Callister first approached us, wanting to buy the land, John refused, said this was our children's inheritance, that we'd prove up the claim and own it outright. Her voice dropped. 2 weeks later, he took ill. By the time I got the doctor out from town, pneumonia had set in. He was dead in 3 days. You think Callister had something to do with it? I think my husband was sick, yes. But I also think the timing was convenient. She wrapped her arms around herself. The doctor said John had been out in a storm, got soaked through. But John never went out in storms. His lungs couldn't take it. Someone had to have let him out there or driven him to it somehow. Rowan absorbed this, the implication settling heavy. Has Callister bothered you since? Twice before yesterday. First time was 2 months after John died. He came alone, all sympathy and concern, offering to buy the land to spare me the burden. I said no. Second time was 6 weeks ago, with one of his men. Less friendly. That's when he mentioned that accidents happen to people who don't know their limits. She met Rowan's eyes. Yesterday was the first time he's come with multiple men, the first time it felt like a real threat instead of a warning. And that was because I'm here now, Rowan said, understanding. He sees me as interference. Yes, which means I've put you in danger just by letting you stay. Lydia's voice was tight. Callister doesn't like being defied, and he has the money and connections to make people disappear. You should probably move on, Mr. Hale, before this gets worse. Thomas called out then, wanting to show them something he'd found, a bird's nest that had fallen from one of the trees. Lydia went to look, and Rowan watched her crouch down next to her son, explaining about robins and spring nesting, her voice gentle, despite the tension he knew she was carrying. That night, after they'd hauled the timber back and stacked it for seasoning, after supper was eaten and the children put to bed, Rowan found Lydia sitting on the cabin steps, staring out at the darkness. I'm not leaving, he said without preamble. She didn't look at him. You should. Probably, but I gave you my word I'd help get this place in order. I don't break my word. He sat down on the step below her, keeping a respectful distance. Besides, I spent 4 years in a war I didn't fully understand. fighting for causes that seemed to change depending on who was talking. This is simpler. A woman and her children trying to keep their home, a bully with money trying to take it. I know which side I'm on. It's not that simple. It is, though. He turned to look at her. Sometimes things are exactly as simple as they look. You have something Callister wants. He thinks he can intimidate you into giving it up because you're alone, but you're not alone anymore, not completely, and that changes his calculations. You're one man, Lydia said. He has 40. I faced worse odds. It was true, mostly, and I'm not planning to face them all at once. Men like Callister, they rely on reputation and fear. They're not used to actual resistance because most people fold before it gets that far. The trick is to make it cost him more than it's worth. Lydia was quiet for a long moment. Why are you doing this? She finally asked. The truth, Mr. Hale. Not some noble speech about justice. Why are you really staying? Rowan considered his answer carefully. The truth was complicated, layered with years of loneliness and running and the hollow feeling that had lived in his chest since the war ended. But she'd asked for truth, and she deserved it. When I rode up yesterday and saw you with your children, he said slowly, I saw something I've been missing my whole life and didn't know how to name. Home. Family. Belonging. I've been drifting for so long, Mrs. Brecker, that I forgot people could have those things, could build them, keep them, fight for them. He paused. I'm not asking to be part of your family. I know that's not on offer, and I'm not presuming, but maybe helping you keep yours gives me something to fight for besides my own survival. Maybe that's enough. Lydia looked at him then, really looked, and he saw her seeing him, not just the drifter in the Confederate coat, but the man underneath, the one who'd been alone too long and had forgotten how to want things. Thomas Hero worships you already, she said quietly. June keeps asking when Mr. Rowan is coming for supper, and She stopped, shook her head. I can't let myself depend on you. Can't let them depend on you. Because when you leave, and you will leave eventually, it will hurt them. It will hurt all of us. I know, Rowan said, and I can't promise I'll stay forever because I don't know what forever looks like, but I can promise I won't leave while you're in danger. I can promise I'll give you notice before I go, so it's not a surprise. And I can promise that while I'm here, I'll do right by you and your children. That's all any of us can promise, Lydia said after a moment. Tomorrow, not forever. Tomorrow's enough. She stood then, brushing off her skirt. The timber needs to season for a few days before it's ready for posts. In the meantime, there's other work. The garden needs planting, we're late as it is, and the cattle need rotating to fresh pasture, and Thomas needs schooling. I've been teaching him reading and numbers at night, but it's not enough. I can help with the garden and cattle, Rowan said. Don't know much about schooling, though. My education was patchy at best. You can read? Well enough. And I know my numbers and basic figuring. Then you can help quiz him on what I teach. She moved toward the cabin door, then paused. Thank you, Mr. Hale. For staying. For being honest. She seemed to struggle for words. For seeing us. Not just as a problem to solve or a weakness to exploit, but as people worth fighting for. You are, Rowan said simply. All of you. She nodded and went inside, and Rowan sat on the steps a while longer, listening to the night sounds. An owl called from the cottonwoods. The creek burbled over its stones. From the barn, one of the cows lowed softly. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Rowan rose before dawn, did the morning chores, feeding animals, gathering eggs, milking the cows. Lydia made breakfast while Thomas helped and June chattered. After eating, Rowan and Thomas would work on whatever project was most pressing, while Lydia tended the garden, or mended clothes, or did the 1,000 other tasks that kept a homestead running. They planted potatoes, beans, squash, corn. Rowan showed Thomas how to build proper mounds, how deep to plant, how to space things for maximum yield. The boy absorbed it all, his young mind hungry for knowledge his father had never possessed. In the afternoons, while the sun was hottest, Lydia would teach lessons, reading from one of their few books, arithmetic problems worked out on a slate, history and geography, recalled from her own schooling. Rowan would listen while he mended tack or sharpened tools, and sometimes Lydia would ask him to share stories from his travels. What Texas looked like, how the Plains tribes tracked buffalo, what it was like in the gold camps of Colorado. June was always there, listening with wide eyes, asking impossible questions. Did buffalo have families? Could Indians talk to horses? Were there really mountains so high they touched the sky? Rowan answered as best he could, tailoring his stories for young ears, leaving out the violence and hardship and focusing on the wonder. The vast spaces, the strange beauty of different lands, the surprising kindness of strangers in hard places. And in the evenings, after supper, there would sometimes be music. Lydia had a small harmonium that had belonged to her mother, and she could play passably well. She'd run through old hymns while the children sang along, their voices high and pure in the lamplight. Rowan didn't sing, his voice was better suited to warning off coyotes, but he listened and felt something in his chest unknot slightly with each passing day. On the fourth day, they began cutting the posts. The timber had seasoned enough, and Rowan showed Thomas how to strip bark, how to shape the ends, how to judge length. They worked steadily, and by evening had a dozen posts ready. "Tomorrow we'll start setting them," Rowan said, examining their work. "You've done good work here, Thomas. Your mama should be proud." "Are you proud?" the boy asked, then looked embarrassed. "I mean, do you think I did well?" Rowan's throat tightened unexpectedly. "I think you did excellent, and I think any man would be lucky to have a son like you." Thomas beamed, and Rowan had to look away, surprised by the intensity of feeling that swept through him. This boy, who'd lost his father and was trying so hard to fill those impossible shoes. This boy who looked at Rowan like he hung the moon when all Rowan had done was teach him to swing an axe properly. That night, while Lydia was putting June to bed, Thomas approached Rowan outside the barn. The boy shuffled his feet, clearly working up courage for something. "Mr. Hale, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you think—" Thomas paused, started again. "Mama said my papa was a good man even though he couldn't fix things or chop wood proper. She said there are different kinds of strength, but I think—" He struggled for words. "I think she wishes he could have been both kinds. The educated kind and the building kind." Rowan knelt down to the boy's level. "Your mama loved your father, Thomas. I'm sure of that. And you're right, she probably wishes he could have done more around the homestead. But that doesn't mean she loved him less. Sometimes we love people not for what they can do, but for who they are. Your father gave your mama you and June. He gave her this land. He tried his best in a hard situation. That counts for a lot." "But you can do both," Thomas said. "You know about books, and you can build things, and you're not scared of Mr. Callister. That's better, isn't it?" "It's different," Rowan said carefully. "Not better, just different. Your father had gifts I don't have. He could teach school, understand complicated ideas, probably knew history and science and things I've never even heard of. I can swing an axe and mend a fence, but I'm not educated like he was. We all have different strengths, Thomas. The trick is not comparing yourself to others, but being the best version of what you are." Thomas nodded slowly, processing. "I want to be both kinds when I grow up, like you." "I'm not—" Rowan started, then stopped. The boy was looking at him with such open admiration, such trust. "If you want to be both kinds, you can be. You're smart enough and strong enough. Just keep learning, keep working, and you'll get there." "Will you still be here to help me?" It was the question Rowan had been dreading. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I hope so. But life's uncertain, Thomas. People leave sometimes even when they don't want to. What I can promise is that while I'm here, I'll teach you everything I know. So even if I have to go someday, you'll have those skills forever." Thomas's face fell slightly, but he nodded. "Okay, that's fair." The boy headed back to the cabin, and Rowan stood watching him go, feeling like he'd just made both a promise and a prophecy he couldn't control. The next morning, they started on the fence. Rowan marked the post holes, and he and Thomas took turns digging while Lydia worked nearby, keeping an eye on June. It was hard work, the ground still partly frozen in places, rocky in others, but they made steady progress, and by afternoon had half the posts in the ground. That's when the riders came. Rowan saw the dust first, heard the hoofbeats. 4 men this time, riding hard. He straightened, wiped sweat from his face, and felt that old cavalry calm settle over him. "Thomas," he said quietly, "go to your mama, now." The boy didn't argue, just ran. Rowan watched Lydia scoop up June, saw Thomas grab the rifle from where it leaned against the fence, saw them all move toward the cabin. Good. Whatever happened next, they'd be out of the immediate line of fire. The riders pulled up in a cloud of dust. Rowan recognized Davis, the man from Callister's first visit. The other 3 were new, harder-looking men with the kind of eyes that said they'd done violence before and wouldn't lose sleep over doing it again. "Hail," Davis said, not bothering with greeting or preamble. "Mr. Callister sent us with a message." "I'm listening." "You got one chance to leave. Take your horse, your gear, and ride out today. No harm, no trouble. You just disappear." "And if I don't?" Davis smiled without humor. "Then we make sure you can't work, can't interfere, can't stand between Mr. Callister and what he wants. Accidents happen to drifters all the time. No one asks too many questions." Rowan considered this. 4 armed men, all probably competent fighters. He was one man with a revolver and a lot of old cavalry training. Not great odds if it came to shooting, but shooting wasn't the only option. "That's not much of a message," Rowan said conversationally. "Sounds more like a threat poorly disguised as advice." "Call it what you want. Point is, you don't belong here. This is between Mr. Callister and the widow. You're just making it harder on everyone, especially her." "Funny, she doesn't seem to think I'm making things harder." "She doesn't know what's good for her." Davis leaned forward in his saddle. "Woman like that, alone with kids? She needs a man's protection. Mr. Callister's offering that protection in exchange for land that's rightfully his anyway. Creek runs through his property upstream and down. That makes this section his by rights." "That's not how water rights work," Rowan said. "And you know it. This land was legally filed, legally claimed. Mrs. Brecker's husband proved up on it. It's hers, free and clear." "Paper rights don't mean much out here," one of the other men said. "Real rights come from who's got the power to hold what they claim." "Is that what you boys are? Callister's power?" Rowan let contempt color his voice. 4 armed men sent to threaten a widow and her children? That must make you real proud when you look in the mirror. Davis's face darkened. "You got a smart mouth for someone who's outnumbered. And you're wasting daylight delivering threats instead of doing something about them. Makes me think your boss doesn't want actual trouble, just wants me scared enough to run. Well, I've been scared before. It takes more than 4 riders and tough talk." For a moment, Rowan thought it would turn to violence right then. He saw Davis's hand move toward his gun, saw the other men tense. But then Davis seemed to think better of it, glancing toward the cabin where Lydia would have a clear shot at anyone who drew first. "You got until tomorrow morning," Davis said instead. "After that, you're fair game. And we won't be giving warnings." They wheeled their horses and rode out fast, leaving Rowan standing in the half-dug post holes, his heart racing despite his calm exterior. Lydia appeared beside him almost immediately. "They threatened you. They tried to scare me off." Rowan pulled off his gloves. "Means Callister's getting impatient, but not desperate yet. Desperate men don't send warnings." "What are we going to do?" "We?" Rowan looked at her. "Yes, we." Her voice was fierce. "You think I'm going to let you face this alone after you stood up for us? After you've worked yourself half to death fixing my home? After my son looks at you like—" She stopped, composing herself. "This is my fight too, Mr. Hale. It always has been." "All right then." Rowan looked at the unfinished fence, at the cabin, at the land stretching around them. "First thing is to finish this fence. I don't like leaving work half done, and we need those cattle contained. Second is to make sure we're ready if Callister escalates. That means being alert, staying armed, and having a plan if things go bad." "What kind of plan?" "The kind where your children are safe no matter what happens to us." He said it bluntly, knowing she needed to hear it. If Callister's men come back and it turns violent, Thomas knows how to ride. He takes June, they go to town, find the sheriff or the priest or whoever's in charge, and they tell them everything. They don't come back until it's safe. Lydia's face went pale, but she nodded. "And us? We hold the line. Make it clear this land isn't free for the taking. He met her eyes. But it might come to shooting, Mrs. Brecker. I need you to understand that. I'll do everything I can to avoid it, but if they force the issue, I know. Her voice was steady. I've thought about this every day since John died. Thought about what I'd do if Callister came with force instead of offers. And I decided I'd rather die fighting for my home than live in town knowing I gave it up to a bully. Let's try not to die, Rowan said dryly. I've heard it's permanent. She surprised him by laughing, a short, sharp sound that was half humor, half hysteria. You're a strange man, Rowan Hale. I've been called worse. They finished the fence that day, working late into the evening by lamplight. Every post set, every rail secured, Rowan felt like they were building more than just a barrier for cattle. They were building a statement. This land is kept. This family is protected. Come at us, if you dare. That night, Thomas asked to sleep in the barn with Rowan. I could keep watch, the boy said, in case those men come back. Lydia started to refuse, but Rowan spoke up first. All right, but you have to promise to wake me if you hear anything unusual. No trying to handle it yourself. Thomas's face lit up. I promise. They set up Thomas's bedroll next to Rowan's in the tack room. Rowan showed him how to keep watch properly, how to listen for wrong sounds, how to tell the difference between normal night noises and trouble approaching, when to raise an alarm versus when to wait and see. My papa never taught me this stuff, Thomas said as they settled in for the night. Your papa taught you other things. Reading, writing, how to think through problems. Those are important too. But this is more exciting, Rowan smiled in the darkness. Exciting isn't always good, Thomas. Most of the exciting things I've done in my life, I'd rather forget. The good things are usually quiet, like fixing fences and planting gardens and eating supper with people you care about. Do you care about us? Thomas's voice was small, vulnerable, in a way the boy rarely allowed. About me and June and Mama? Rowan felt his chest tighten again. The honest answer was yes. He cared far more than he'd intended to, far more than was probably wise given that he'd only known them a handful of days. But the boy deserved honesty. Yes, he said quietly, I do. More than I expected to. Good, Thomas said, sounding satisfied, because we care about you too. Mama hasn't said it, but I can tell. She smiles more now, and she doesn't cry at night anymore. Before Rowan could figure out how to respond to that, the boy had drifted off to sleep, exhausted from the day's work. Rowan lay awake longer, listening to Thomas's steady breathing, the quiet sounds of the barn around them. He thought about Callister's deadline, tomorrow morning, and what it might bring. He thought about Lydia's fierce declaration that this was her fight too. He thought about June's innocent trust and Thomas's growing hero worship, and the dangerous position he'd put himself in by caring about any of them. He should leave. The smart play was to saddle his horse in the night and disappear before Callister's men returned. Save himself, avoid the trouble, keep drifting like he'd always done. But he'd meant what he told Lydia. He'd seen something here, home, family, belonging, that he'd been missing his whole life. And maybe he couldn't have it for himself, not really, not permanently, but he could protect it for them, could stand between this family and the man who wanted to take everything they had. Sometimes that was enough. Sometimes protecting something beautiful was reason enough to stay and fight, even when the odds were bad and the outcome uncertain. Rowan finally drifted off to sleep with his hand near his revolver and a sense of purpose he hadn't felt since before the war. Tomorrow morning would come soon enough, and with it, whatever Callister had planned. But tonight, in this barn, with a boy sleeping trustfully nearby and a family worth defending in the cabin beyond, Rowan Hale felt something he'd almost forgotten how to feel. He felt like he mattered, like his life might mean something beyond simple survival. And that, he discovered, was worth fighting for after all. Morning came with a tension that seemed to thicken the air itself. Rowan woke before dawn to find Thomas already stirring, the boy's eyes wide and alert despite the early hour. They'd both slept restlessly, every sound pulling them partway to consciousness, waiting for trouble that hadn't yet arrived. They didn't come, Thomas whispered, as if speaking too loud might summon Callister's men from thin air. Not yet, Rowan said, pulling on his boots, but the day's young. They did the morning chores together, moving quietly through the routine of feeding and watering. The animals sensed something, horses shifting nervously in their stalls, the cows more skittish than usual. Animals always knew when violence was brewing. Rowan had learned during the war. They could smell fear and anticipation on human skin. Lydia was already up when they entered the cabin, breakfast cooking on the stove. But Rowan noticed she'd changed her usual pattern. The rifle was propped within easy reach by the door, and she'd positioned herself where she could see the yard through the window. June sat at the table, quieter than normal, picking at a rag doll without her usual chatter. "They know something's wrong," Lydia said, nodding toward her daughter. "Children always know." "We don't have to pretend everything's fine," Rowan said. "But we don't have to frighten them either. They need to understand there might be trouble, but that we're prepared for it." After breakfast, Rowan sat both children down at the table. June climbed into her mother's lap while Thomas sat straight-backed, trying to look brave. "You both know Mr. Callister wants our land," Lydia began, her voice steady. "And you know he's not a good man. Today he might send his men back to try and scare us. If that happens, I need you both to listen very carefully to what Mr. Rowan and I tell you." "Are they going to hurt us?" June asked, her small voice muffled against her mother's shoulder. "Not if we can help it," Rowan said. "But Thomas, remember what we talked about last night? About having a plan?" The boy nodded solemnly. "If things get dangerous, if there's shooting, or if your mama or I tell you to run, you take June, you get on your pony, and you ride to town as fast as you can. You go straight to the church, find Father Mackenzie, and you tell him everything. You don't come back until he says it's safe. Understand?" "But what about you and Mama?" Thomas's voice cracked slightly. "We'll be fine," Lydia said, though her eyes met Rowan's over her children's heads, and they both knew it was a promise neither could guarantee. "But you're the man of this family, Thomas. Your first job is protecting your sister. Everything else comes second." "I can shoot," Thomas protested. "Papa taught me with the rifle. I could help fight." "No." Rowan's voice was firm, but not harsh. "Fighting isn't about being brave or proving yourself. It's about doing what needs doing, and what needs doing is keeping June safe. That's harder than fighting, Thomas. That takes more courage. Can you do that?" The boy's eyes shone with unshed tears, but he nodded. "Yes, sir." "Good man." They spent the morning working close to the cabin, no one straying far. Rowan repaired a broken wagon wheel while keeping his rifle nearby. Lydia worked in the garden, but positioned herself where she had clear sightlines to the approaches. Thomas played with June, but even their games were subdued, both children casting frequent glances toward the horizon. Noon came and went, then early afternoon. The waiting stretched Rowan's nerves taut, and he could see the same tension in Lydia's shoulders, the tight set of her jaw. Maybe Callister had decided the warning was enough. Maybe he'd moved on to easier targets. Maybe... The shot came from the direction of the north pasture, a single rifle crack that sent birds exploding from the cottonwoods. Rowan was moving before the echo faded, grabbing his rifle and running toward the sound. Behind him, he heard Lydia shouting for the children to get inside, heard the cabin door slam. His boots pounded the earth as he ran, his shoulders still aching from the old war wound, but adrenaline pushing him forward. He crested a small rise and saw them, 3 of Callister's men standing near the new fence line. One held a rifle, smoke still curling from the barrel. The fence Rowan and Thomas had worked so hard to build lay in ruins, posts pulled up, rails scattered. And beyond the broken fence, Lydia's cattle were scattering across the open range, driven by a 4th man on horseback. Rage flooded through Rowan, hot and immediate. He raised his rifle, sighted on the fence, and fired a warning shot that kicked up dirt 5 feet in front of the nearest man. "That's far enough," he called out, working the lever action to chamber another round. "Next one goes through flesh, not dirt." The 3 men turned. Davis was among them, and his face split into an ugly grin. "Told you yesterday morning, Hale, you were warned. And I told you this land isn't yours to destroy." Rowan kept his rifle steady, aimed center mass at Davis. "Call your man back. Leave the cattle where they are." "Can't do that. See, those cattle are on open range now, and open range means anyone can claim them. Mr. Callister's just exercising his rights as a cattleman." Davis's hand drifted toward his sidearm. "You gonna shoot all 4 of us before one of us shoots you?" "I'll shoot you first," Rowan said calmly. "That's guaranteed. And from this range with this rifle, I won't miss. Your friends might get me after, but you'll be dead on the ground. That math work for you?" Davis's confidence flickered. Behind Rowan, he heard footsteps. Lydia arriving, breathing hard, her shotgun in hand. "4 of you against 2 of us," she said, her voice carrying across the distance. "But I've got a double barrel pointed at your friends, and at this distance I don't need to aim precise, just generally in your direction. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to call your man back, you're going to leave our cattle alone, and you're going to ride out. Or we start shooting and see who's left standing when it's over." "You'd risk dying over some cattle?" one of the other men asked, sounding genuinely confused. "I'd risk dying over principle," Lydia said. "Over my home and my children's future. Over not letting bullies take whatever they want just because they have more guns. So yes, I'd risk it. Question is, are you willing to die for Grant Callister's greed? Because that's what you'd be dying for. Not your land, not your family. Just another man's property grab." The silence stretched out, taut as a bowstring. Rowan could see the men calculating, weighing their orders against their mortality. The rider who'd been chasing the cattle had stopped, watching the standoff, his hand on his own rifle but not raising it. "Mr. Callister's not going to like this," Davis finally said. "I don't care what Mr. Callister likes," Rowan replied. "Tell him if he wants this land, he can come talk like a civilized man instead of sending thugs to destroy property and steal cattle. Tell him the next time anyone comes onto this land uninvited, we shoot first and ask questions never. Tell him—" The shot came from behind them, from the direction of the cabin. Thomas's voice followed, high and frightened. "Mama, there's more coming!" Rowan spun, his heart dropping into his stomach. Through the trees, he could see riders approaching the cabin, at least 3 more men, maybe 4. They'd been flanked, the destruction of the fence just a distraction to draw him and Lydia away from the children. "Go!" he shouted at Lydia. "I've got these!" She didn't argue, just turned and ran back toward the cabin, her skirts flying. Rowan backed away from Davis and his men, keeping his rifle trained on them. "You stay right there," he warned. "Don't even think about following." "Wasn't planning to," Davis said, and his smile was back. "We already did our job. Rest is just watching the show." Rowan turned and sprinted after Lydia, his lungs burning. He could hear shouting now from the cabin, men's voices demanding entry, Thomas yelling back through the door. He burst into the yard to see 5 men on horseback surrounding the cabin, and among them, sitting calm as you please on a big bay gelding, was Grant Callister himself. "Mrs. Brecker," Callister called out, his voice jovial despite the circumstances. "I do believe we have a situation here. My men tell me there's been some hostility, some threats made. I thought I should come personally to sort this out before anyone does something they'll regret." Lydia stood on the porch, shotgun raised. Behind the cabin door, Rowan could see Thomas's face, pale and frightened, with June's small form pressed behind him. "Get off my land," Lydia said, her voice shaking with fury. "You have no right to be here." "Now, I disagree with that assessment," Callister said reasonably. "See, I've been going through the land office records, and there seems to be some question about whether your late husband properly filed all the necessary paperwork. Some irregularities in the claim process. Nothing I'm sure we can't resolve, but it does put your ownership in doubt." "That's a lie," Lydia said. "John filed everything properly. We have the deed." "Do you?" "Because I don't see it recorded in the territorial registry. Easy mistake, your husband was sick, distracted. These things happen." Callister's smile was sympathetic, poisonous. "Point is, without proper documentation, this land reverts to open claim, and I'm here to file that claim." Rowan reached the porch, taking a position beside Lydia. His rifle was still in his hands, and he made sure Callister saw it. "That's not how land law works, and you know it," he said. "You can't just manufacture irregularities and steal someone's home." "I'm not stealing anything," Callister said, his voice hardening. "I'm correcting a mistake in the public record, and you, Mr. Hale, are trespassing on land that's about to be legally mine. I'm being generous by giving you all one final chance to leave peacefully. Take whatever possessions you can carry, and I'll provide transport to town. You can file a dispute if you want, though I warn you the territorial judge is a personal friend of mine." "We're not leaving," Lydia said. "Then you're squatting on my property, and I'm within my rights to remove you by force." "Try it," Rowan said quietly. "See what happens." Callister studied him for a long moment. "You really willing to die for this, Hale?" You've been here what, a week? 2? This isn't your fight. It is now. Why? What's she offering you that's worth bleeding for? Because I guarantee if you make me take this land by force, there will be blood. Mine and yours both. Rowan felt Lydia tense beside him, felt the weight of Callister's implication. The rancher was suggesting Rowan was being paid in something other than honest wages, trying to drive a wedge between them, to make Lydia doubt his motivations. It was a clever move, and dangerous. Mrs. Brecker's not offering me anything but honest work for honest pay, Rowan said, keeping his voice level. I'm staying because she's in the right and you're in the wrong. Because those children behind that door deserve to keep their home. Because I'm tired of watching bullies take what they want just because they can. That reason enough for you? Principles, Callister said with contempt. Men have died for less, I suppose, but usually they're young and stupid. You look old enough to know better. I know plenty. No, you're not going to shoot us in front of those children, not in broad daylight. No, you're not actually going to attack because then you'd have witnesses and bodies and questions from the territorial marshal. No, this whole show is meant to intimidate us into leaving on our own so you can maintain your reputation as a legitimate businessman instead of the thief and murderer you really are. Callister's face went cold. Careful with your accusations, Hale. Truth's not an accusation. John Brecker was sick but managing. Then he refused to sell to you, and suddenly he's dead of pneumonia after getting soaked in a storm he'd never have gone out in alone. That's awfully convenient timing. You're talking about things you don't understand, Callister said, but Rowan saw something flicker in his eyes. Guilt, maybe, or just irritation at being called out. I understand enough. I understand you want this land because of the water rights. I understand you thought a widow alone would be easy to push around. And I understand you're getting frustrated because it's taking longer than you expected. Rowan stepped off the porch, moving closer, his rifle still ready. But here's what you need to understand. We're not leaving. You're not taking this land. And if you push this to violence, you better bring enough men to finish the job, because I promise you, some of your people won't make it home. The yard went silent. Callister's men shifted nervously in their saddles, hands near weapons, but nobody drawing. The moment balanced on a knife's edge, death hanging in the air like a held breath. Then Callister laughed, a genuine sound of surprised amusement. You've got spine, Hale, I'll give you that. Stupid, but spine. He gathered his reins. All right, you want to make this difficult? We'll make it difficult. But don't say I didn't offer you the easy way out. He turned his horse, and his men followed. They rode out at a walk, deliberate and unhurried, making it clear they were choosing to leave, not being driven off. At the edge of the yard, Callister turned back. Mrs. Brecker, he called, I'm filing my claim with the land office tomorrow. When it's approved, and it will be approved, you'll be evicted by the territorial marshal. At that point, if you're still here, you'll be criminals. I strongly suggest you reconsider your position while you still have the chance. They watched until the riders disappeared over the rise. Only then did Lydia lower her shotgun, her hand shaking so badly she nearly dropped it. Rowan caught it, set it carefully aside, and steadied her with a hand on her shoulder. Mama! June burst from the cabin, followed by Thomas. Both children threw themselves at their mother, and she sank down onto the porch steps, gathering them close. It's all right, she murmured, though tears were streaming down her face. We're all right. Everyone's safe. But Rowan knew they weren't all right. Not really. Callister had shifted tactics, moving from intimidation to pseudo-legal maneuvering. If he could actually manufacture evidence of irregularities in the land claim, if he really did have the territorial judge in his pocket, they could lose everything without a shot being fired. We need to find that deed, Rowan said. Original documentation, property surveys, any paperwork your husband filed. Everything. Lydia looked up at him, her eyes red but fierce. It's all in the trunk. John was meticulous about records. It's the teacher in him. Every piece of paper related to this land he kept. Then we go through it. Tonight. We document everything, and tomorrow we ride to town and file our own claim renewal, make sure everything's properly recorded where Callister can't accidentally lose it. The land office is run by Henry Walsh, Lydia said. He's honest, but he's also cautious. If Callister's gotten to him first, convinced him there are irregularities, then we get witnesses. We find people who know this claim was legitimate, who can testify if needed. The priest, The doctor, whoever else your husband dealt with when he filed. Rowan was thinking out loud now, planning like he used to plan cavalry raids. We build a case so airtight that even a corrupt judge can't dismiss it without showing his corruption. And if that doesn't work? Thomas asked, his voice small. Rowan looked at the boy, at his frightened face and determined eyes. Then we fight. But not with guns if we can help it. We fight with law and witnesses and public opinion. We make it so expensive for Callister to steal this land that it's not worth it anymore. That night, after supper, which no one had much appetite for, they spread the contents of John Brecker's trunk across the table. Deeds, surveys, claim forms, payment receipts, letters from the land office confirming filing dates, and claim numbers. John had indeed been meticulous, and Lydia had been right. Every piece of documentation was in order, signed and dated and proper. "This is good," Rowan said, examining a survey map. "This proves your boundaries, shows the creek access is legally yours. If Callister's claiming irregularities, he's flat out lying." "But if the judge is his friend," Lydia said, "what does truth matter?" "Truth matters because lies require maintenance," Rowan said. "You can fool one person or bribe one official, but it's harder to fool everyone. We take this to the land office. We make Walsh file it on the record with witnesses present. Then we talk to the newspaper editor, the sheriff, the priest, anyone with standing in the community. We make this public. Make it known what Callister's trying to do. Maybe the judge is corrupt, but even corrupt men care about their reputations." Lydia studied the documents spread before them. John used to say that education was the only real power poor people had, that knowing the law, understanding your rights, that was what protected you when money and guns couldn't. She looked up at Rowan. "He'd have liked you. You think like he did, just with different tools." "I'd have liked to meet him," Rowan said honestly. "Man who built all this, raised these children, loved you enough to die fighting for your future, that's a man worth knowing." She reached across the table and squeezed his hand briefly, a gesture of gratitude and something more complex. Then she pulled back, focusing on the papers again. They worked late into the night, organizing everything, making copies of key documents in Lydia's careful handwriting. Thomas fell asleep at the table, and Rowan carried him to bed, tucking him in next to June in the loft. When he came back down, Lydia was still working, her face drawn with exhaustion. "You should sleep," he said gently. "Can't. Every time I close my eyes, I see Callister's face, or I see John dying, or I see my children being forced from their home." She set down her pen, rubbed her eyes. "How do you do it? Stay calm when everything's falling apart?" "Practice," Rowan said. 4 years of war teaches you that panic wastes energy. You do what you can, plan for what might come, and accept that some things are beyond your control. I can't accept losing this place." "Then we won't lose it." He sat down across from her. "Lydia. May I call you Lydia?" She nodded. "Lydia, I want you to understand something. What I said to Callister about being willing to die here, I meant it. Not because I have some death wish, but because this is the first thing in years that's felt worth protecting. You and your children, this land, the life you're fighting to keep, it matters. And I'll do everything in my power to make sure you keep it." "Why?" she asked, echoing Callister's question from earlier. "Why does it matter to you?" "Because I saw you hanging laundry while your children played, and it looked like home. Because Thomas needs someone to teach him things his father couldn't. Because June trusts me to keep her safe. Because you're the strongest person I've met in a long time, and strength like that deserves to be protected, not crushed." He paused. "And because somewhere in the last week, you've all become the closest thing to family I've had in 20 years. Tears spilled over Lydia's lashes, but she was smiling through them. "You're an impossible man, Rowan Hale. So I've been told." She stood, gathered the papers into neat stacks. "Tomorrow we ride to town at first light, all of us. We do this together, as a family." She said the last word deliberately, testing it, and Rowan felt his chest constrict. "As a family," he agreed. They went to their separate sleeping places, Lydia to her bed in the cabin, Rowan to the barn, but both lay awake in the darkness, thinking about what tomorrow might bring. Thinking about all the ways this could still go wrong and the narrow path that might lead them through. Rowan stared at the barn rafters, listening to the night sounds. an owl hunting in the cottonwoods, the creek whispering over stones. Somewhere far off, a coyote chorus celebrating a kill or mourning a loss. He could never tell which. He thought about John Brecker, dying of pneumonia in this cabin, knowing he was leaving his family vulnerable. Had he asked Lydia to sell? To take the money and go somewhere safer? Or had he trusted that she'd find a way? That someone would come along to help shoulder the burden he was leaving behind? Rowan couldn't know. But he could honor the man's memory by protecting what he'd built, by being the strength John hadn't lived long enough to provide. Morning would come soon, and with it, the next battle in a war that was far from over. But tonight, in this barn, listening to sounds that had become familiar and dear, Rowan Hale felt something he'd thought the war had killed in him. He felt hope. Dawn broke cold and clear, the kind of morning that promised a hard ride but good traveling. Rowan had the wagon hitched and ready before the children woke, checking the harness twice, making sure everything was secure. Lydia emerged from the cabin with the leather document case clutched under one arm, her other hand steadying June on her hip. Thomas followed, carrying a small pack with food for the journey. The ride to town took 3 hours, the wagon creaking along the rutted road that wound through the valley and over the ridge. They passed other homesteads, some thriving, some abandoned, all of them testament to how hard this land could be and how easily dreams could die out here. Thomas sat up front with Rowan, asking questions about the horses and the road ahead, while Lydia and June rode in the back, June pointing out clouds and birds and making up stories about both. But underneath the children's chatter, tension rode with them like an unwelcome passenger. Every rider they passed made Rowan's hand drift toward his revolver. Every distant dust cloud made Lydia scan the horizon with worried eyes. They were exposed out here, vulnerable, and they all knew Callister could have men watching the road. The town of Copper Falls wasn't much, a main street with perhaps 20 buildings, a church with a crooked steeple, a handful of houses scattered beyond. But it had a land office, a sheriff, and a newspaper. That was enough. Rowan pulled the wagon up in front of the land office, a small building with a faded sign that read Territorial Land Claims, H. Walsh, Agent. Through the window, he could see a thin man with spectacles working at a desk. "Thomas, you stay with the wagon and watch your sister," Lydia said, climbing down. "Mr. Hale and I will handle this." "But Mama!" "No arguments. Keep June safe. That's your job." The boy nodded reluctantly, and Rowan caught his eye. "You're doing good, Thomas. Being the man your mama needs you to be." Inside, the land office smelled of paper and dust and old coffee. Henry Walsh looked up as they entered, his expression shifting from welcoming to wary in the space of a heartbeat. "Mrs. Brecker," he said, standing, "I wasn't expecting you today." "Mr. Walsh." Lydia set the document case on his desk with a decisive thump. "I'm here to confirm the registration of my land claim and ensure all documentation is properly filed and recorded." Walsh's eyes flicked to Rowan, taking in the Confederate coat, the revolver, the way he stood slightly behind Lydia but with clear protective intent. "I see you've brought assistance. This is Rowan Hale. He works for me." Lydia opened the case, began spreading documents across the desk. "Here's our original claim filing from 1867. Survey maps, payment receipts for filing fees, correspondence from your office confirming receipt and approval, proof of improvement and habitation, everything required by territorial law to establish legal ownership." Walsh picked up the papers with shaking hands, his face growing paler as he examined them. "Mrs. Brecker, I need to inform you that there's been a question raised about certain aspects of your claim." "By Grant Callister," Rowan said flatly. Walsh flinched. "Mr. Callister has raised concerns about potential irregularities in the original filing process. As land agent, I'm obligated to investigate any formal disputes." "What irregularities?" Lydia's voice was steel. "Every piece of paper required by law is right there in front of you. My husband was a school teacher, Mr. Walsh. He understood documentation. There are no irregularities. The concern is that the survey may have been conducted by an uncertified surveyor," Walsh said, not meeting her eyes. "If the boundaries aren't officially recognized, then the claim itself—" "Benjamin Morrison conducted our survey," Lydia interrupted. "He's been the territorial surveyor for 15 years. Are you suggesting his credentials are suddenly invalid? Walsh set down the papers, removed his spectacles, and rubbed his eyes. When he spoke again, his voice was tired and defeated. Mrs. Brecker, Mr. Callister filed a competing claim yesterday afternoon. He's arguing that the water rights for that section of Willow Creek were improperly allocated, that they should default to his ranch as the primary downstream user. He's also suggesting that your late husband never completed the full 5-year habitation requirement before his death, which means the claim wasn't properly proved up. That's a lie, Lydia said, her voice shaking with rage. We lived on that land for 6 years before John died. 6 years, Mr. Walsh. We built a cabin, a barn, we cleared fields and ran cattle. Every requirement was met and exceeded. I'm sure that's true, but without Mr. Brecker here to testify and with questions about the documentation, Walsh trailed off miserably. You're going to let him steal my land, Lydia said. You're going to sit there and let Grant Callister manufacture lies and take my children's home because you're too afraid to stand up to him. I'm not afraid. Walsh's voice rose, then dropped. I'm one man, Mrs. Brecker. I have a wife and 3 children. Mr. Callister made it very clear what would happen to my position, to my family's security, if I didn't cooperate. I'm sorry. I truly am. But I can't fight him. Rowan stepped forward then, placing both hands on Walsh's desk and leaning in. You have a choice here, Mr. Walsh. You can be a coward who helps a rich man steal from a widow, or you can be a man who does his job according to the law. Which one are you going to be? You don't understand. I understand perfectly. You're scared. That's reasonable. Callister's dangerous. But you know what's more dangerous? Living with yourself after you've betrayed everything you're supposed to stand for. Looking at your children and knowing you taught them that power matters more than right, that money trumps justice. Walsh stared at him, conflict written across his face. File her claim renewal, Rowan continued. Do it properly, with witnesses in the official record book, where it can't be disappeared or altered. Do your job. Then we'll deal with Callister's false claim through proper legal channels. And if Callister comes after me? Then you'll have us standing with you, Lydia said. You think you're alone in this, Mr. Walsh? You think there aren't a dozen other families Callister has pushed around, threatened, stolen from? Someone has to be first to stand up. Let it be us, together. Walsh looked at the document spread across his desk, then at Lydia's determined face, then at Rowan's steady gaze. Rowan could see the moment the man decided, saw something straighten in his spine. All right, Walsh said quietly. All right, let me get the record book. He disappeared into a back room and returned with a massive leather-bound ledger. With trembling but determined hands, he began recording Lydia's claim information, copying the details from her documentation, noting dates and survey numbers and payment confirmations. As he worked, Rowan stepped outside and called to Thomas. Go find Father Mackenzie at the church. Tell him Mrs. Brecker needs witnesses at the land office. Quickly now. Thomas took off running, June calling after him in confusion. Rowan scooped her up. Your brother's being a helper. Want to come inside and see? Inside, Walsh was still writing, his careful script filling page after page. By the time he finished, Father Mackenzie had arrived, a broad-shouldered Irishman with kind eyes and a boxer's hands, along with Doc Sterling and Mrs. Chen, who ran the general store. All 3 looked curious and concerned. What's this about, Lydia? Father Mackenzie asked. Witnesses, she said. Mr. Walsh is officially recording the renewal of our land claim. I want people to see it done proper, so there's no question later. Understanding flickered across the priest's face. Grant Callister. He's trying to steal her land through legal manipulation, Rowan said. We're making sure that's harder to do. Walsh signed the entry with a flourish, then turned the book so Lydia could sign as well. I'll need 2 witnesses to sign as having observed this filing. Father Mackenzie stepped forward without hesitation. I'll sign. He took the pen, added his name in bold letters, then passed it to Doc Sterling, who signed as well. It's done, Walsh said, his voice stronger now. Mrs. Lydia Brecker's claim to the property at Willow Creek Section 12 is officially renewed and recorded as of this date, witnessed by 2 citizens in good standing. The original claim is confirmed as valid, and all territorial requirements are noted as fulfilled. And Callister's competing claim, Rowan asked, will be noted as disputing an already established and recorded claim. That puts the burden of proof on him to show why the existing claim should be invalidated, which, given the documentation Mrs. Brecker has provided, will be nearly impossible unless he wants to openly bribe a judge, which even he won't do with this many witnesses involved. He'll be angry, Mrs. Chen said quietly. Very angry. Let him be angry, Father Mackenzie said. Anger doesn't change what's legal and what's not. I've watched Grant Callister push people around for 10 years. It's about time someone pushed back. They left the land office with copies of the filing, signed and witnessed, secured in Lydia's document case. On the street, a small crowd had gathered, word spreading fast in a small town, and Rowan noticed people watching with expressions ranging from support to fear to calculation. News of this would reach Callister within hours. We should head to the newspaper office, Rowan said. Get this on the record there, too. The Copper Falls Gazette was run by a woman named Margaret Pierce, a widow herself who'd taken over her husband's press after he died of a mining accident 5 years back. She listened to their story with sharp attention, making notes, asking pointed questions about dates and documentation. You understand this will make you a target, she said to Lydia. Not just you, but anyone who supports you. Callister doesn't like being challenged publicly. I understand, Lydia said. But I also understand that silence is what lets men like him win. My husband used to say that sunlight was the best disinfectant for corruption. Maybe it's time to let some light in. Margaret smiled grimly. I'll run the story in tomorrow's edition, front page, and I'll include the fact that Father Mackenzie and Doc Sterling witnessed your filing. Hard for Callister to claim irregularities when respected community members have publicly verified your documentation. They stopped at the general store on the way out of town. Mrs. Chen insisted on extending Lydia's credit, pressing extra supplies into their hands: coffee, sugar, flour, things they'd been doing without. You pay when you can, she said firmly. No arguments. Other townspeople approached as well, cautiously at first, then with more confidence. A rancher named Cooper who'd lost land to Callister 3 years back. A widow named Sullivan who'd been pressured to sell for pennies on the dollar. A shopkeeper whose business had been boycotted by Callister's men until he nearly went bankrupt. Each had a story, each had grievances, and each seemed emboldened by Lydia's stand. We should organize, Cooper said. All of us who've been hurt by Callister. There's strength in numbers. A citizens' committee, Father Mackenzie suggested, to monitor land claims, support families facing intimidation, provide witnesses when needed. That's dangerous talk, someone said from the back of the small crowd. Living is dangerous, Mrs. Sullivan replied, but living as cowards is worse. By the time they loaded back into the wagon for the journey home, the sun was past its zenith and something had shifted. What had started as one woman fighting for her home had become something larger, a community beginning to push back against years of unchecked power. Thomas was unusually quiet on the ride back, processing what he'd witnessed. Finally, he looked up at Rowan. Are we going to win? I don't know, Rowan said honestly, but we've made it harder for us to lose. Sometimes that's the best you can do, make the right choice harder to ignore and the wrong choice harder to execute. Papa used to say something like that. He said teaching wasn't about making kids smart, it was about making ignorance harder to maintain. Rowan smiled. Your father was a wise man. They were an hour from home when Rowan spotted the smoke, dark and thick, rising from the direction of the homestead. His hands tightened on the reins and Lydia saw it too, her face going white. No, she whispered. Please, no. Rowan urged the horses faster, the wagon bouncing dangerously over the rough road. Thomas held on to his seat, June crying in her mother's arms, all of them frozen with dread at what they might find. They crested the final rise and saw it. The barn was burning, flames leaping from the roof, smoke pouring from the open doors. The cattle were scattered again, the chickens gone, and painted across the side of the cabin in crude black letters were the words, Last Warning. Lydia let out a sound somewhere between a sob and a scream and jumped from the wagon before it fully stopped, running toward the cabin. Rowan grabbed the reins, bringing the horses under control, shouting for Thomas to stay with June. The cabin itself wasn't on fire, he saw with relief, just vandalized. But the barn was fully engulfed, past saving. He could hear the animals inside screaming, and he ran toward the sound without thinking, knowing it was foolish but unable to stop himself. The heat hit him like a wall 10 feet from the door. Through the flames he could see movement, the horses in their stalls, trapped, panicking. He pulled his coat up over his face and plunged into the smoke. The world became heat and darkness and the terrified screams of animals. Rowan felt his way to the first stall, fumbled with the latch, finally got it open. The horse bolted past him, nearly knocking him down. The second stall, the same. Then the third, but this horse wouldn't move, too frightened to run even toward escape. Rowan grabbed its halter, pulled with all his strength, and finally the animal lurched forward. They stumbled together through the burning building, Rowan's lungs screaming for air, his skin blistering from the heat. They burst out into daylight just as part of the roof collapsed behind them. Rowan fell to his knees, coughing violently, his throat raw. Hands pulled him further from the fire. Lydia and Thomas, both talking at once, their voices frantic with concern. Water splashed over his face, blessed and cold. "The goats," he managed to rasp out. "The cows." "Already out," Lydia said, tears streaming down her face. "Thomas got them while you were—" She couldn't finish. They watched the barn burn, there being nothing else to do. The structure that Rowan had repaired only days ago, that had sheltered him at night, that had stood as a symbol of John Brecker's dreams, collapsed in on itself with a roar of flame and falling timber. When the fire finally burned itself out, leaving only smoking ruins, they stood together in the yard surveying the damage. The barn was gone. The chicken coop was smashed. The new fence they'd built was torn down again, and everywhere were hoofprints, at least a dozen horses, maybe more. Callister had sent a whole crew. "They did this while we were in town," Lydia said numbly. "They watched us leave and then they came." "They wanted to send a message," Rowan said, his voice rough from smoke. "Wanted us to know that filing papers doesn't matter, that they can still hurt us whenever they want." "It worked," Lydia whispered. "I'm scared, Rowan. I'm so scared." June was crying, overwhelmed by the destruction. Thomas stood silent, his face hard and angry, beyond his years. And Lydia just looked broken, all the fierce determination from earlier crumpled by the sight of everything burning. Rowan wanted to say something reassuring, wanted to promise it would be all right. But the lies stuck in his throat. They'd won a legal victory today, but Callister had responded with raw violence. And the message was clear. Paperwork wouldn't save them if he decided to simply burn them out, or worse. "We need to decide," Rowan finally said. "Right now, tonight. Do we stay, or do we go? Because if we stay, this gets worse before it gets better. Callister's escalating. Next time it might not be just the barn." Lydia looked at her children, at her ruined barn, at the cabin with its threatening message. For a long moment, Rowan thought she would break, would say they should take what they could, and run. Then she straightened her shoulders and wiped her eyes. "We stay. We rebuild. And we make him regret every single thing he's done to us." "Mama, are you sure?" Thomas asked, his voice small. "I'm sure." She pulled both children close. "This is our home. Your father died protecting it, and I will not dishonor his memory by giving up now. We'll rebuild the barn, we'll fix the fence, we'll plant the garden and raise the cattle and prove that we belong here. And if Callister wants to stop us, he'll have to do worse than burn an empty building." Rowan looked at her standing there in the ruins, her children clutched to her sides, her face set with determination that bordered on defiance, and felt something shift in his chest. This woman who'd been knocked down again and again and kept getting back up. This family who'd lost so much but refused to lose each other or their home. He'd seen brave men in the war, soldiers who'd charged impossible positions because orders demanded it. But this was different. This was choosing to stay and fight when running would be easier, when surrender would be understandable. This was courage of a purer kind. "All right then," he said, "we stay. But we do it smart. We take watches at night, all of us. We keep weapons close. We don't go anywhere alone. And we start building alliances with Cooper and the others in town, with anyone willing to stand against Callister. He's got numbers. But maybe we can even those odds." "How?" Thomas asked. By making this about more than just us. By showing other people they don't have to be afraid. By proving that Callister can be resisted. Rowan looked at the smoking ruins. He wanted to break you with this. Instead, let's make it the moment everything changed. The moment people stopped accepting that might makes right. That night, they made camp outside the cabin. No one wanted to sleep inside with that threatening message painted on the wall. Rowan kept watch while Lydia and the children slept, his rifle across his knees, his ears attuned to every sound in the darkness. Around midnight, Lydia came to sit beside him, unable to sleep. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for going into the barn, for saving the horses, for—" She gestured helplessly at everything. "For all of it. I didn't save everything. You saved what mattered, the animals we need to work this land, and you nearly died doing it." She touched his arm gently, where the fabric of his shirt had burned through in places, leaving angry red marks on his skin. "You could have been killed. I've been close to death before. Somehow I keep walking away from it." "Why?" She asked the question that had been building all day. "Why are you still here, Rowan? You could have left any time, could have ridden away today while we were in town and saved yourself from all this. But you didn't. You came back knowing what you'd find. Why?" Rowan was quiet for a long moment, watching the stars wheel overhead, listening to the creek that had caused all this trouble in the first place. "When I left the cavalry," he finally said, "I thought I'd left everything worth dying for behind, spent 6 months drifting, not caring much about tomorrow because today felt empty. Then I rode up to your homestead and saw something I'd forgotten existed, people building a life together, fighting for each other, making something out of nothing. And I wanted—" He paused, struggling for words. "I wanted to be part of something like that, even just on the edges of it." "You're not on the edges anymore," Lydia said. "You're right in the center, whether you meant to be or not." "I know, and that should scare me more than it does." She leaned against his shoulder just slightly, seeking comfort or offering it, or both. They sat like that for a while. Two people who'd been alone too long, finding unexpected solace in shared danger and determination. "Rowan," she said eventually, "if we survive this, if we actually manage to keep this land and build our lives here, would you—" Well, she stopped, started again. "Would you consider staying, not just as hired help, but as—" She couldn't quite say it. "As family," he finished gently. "Yes." He felt his heart hammering in his chest, a feeling he'd thought the war had beaten out of him. "Lydia, I'm a drifter with nothing but a horse and a Confederate coat. I've got no land, no money, no prospects. I've killed men and done things I'm not proud of. Are you sure that's what you want for yourself and your children?" "I'm sure," she said firmly. "You're also a man who ran into a burning building to save animals, who taught my son to work with patience and pride, who makes my daughter laugh, who stood up to Grant Callister when he had every reason to walk away. That's what I see, Rowan. That's who you are, regardless of what you used to be." "If we survive this," Rowan said carefully, "I would be honored to stay, to be part of this family, if you'll have me. But let's survive it first." "Deal," Lydia said, and he heard the smile in her voice despite everything. As dawn approached and a new day began, one that would bring fresh challenges and choices, Rowan Hale felt something he hadn't felt in longer than he could remember. He felt like he was home, and that, more than any legal filing or community support, was worth fighting for. Worth everything. The morning after the fire dawned with an unexpected sound, voices, many of them, and the creak of wagon wheels. Rowan came awake instantly, hand on his revolver, but Lydia was already up, staring toward the road with an expression of disbelief. Coming over the rise were wagons, at least a dozen, filled with people and lumber and tools. Father Mackenzie led the procession on horseback, with Cooper and Mrs. Sullivan driving the first wagon, and behind them came what looked like half the town of Copper Falls. "What in the world?" Lydia breathed. They came on steadily, pulling into the yard where the barn had stood. Father Mackenzie dismounted, surveying the destruction with a grim face before turning to Lydia. "We heard what happened," he said simply. "Callister's men were bragging about it in the saloon last night. Thought it was funny, burning out a widow and her children." His voice hardened. "We decided it wasn't funny at all. So we brought lumber and nails and enough hands to raise a new barn. If you'll have our help." Lydia pressed her hand to her mouth, overwhelmed. Thomas and June had emerged from the cabin, both children staring wide-eyed at the gathering crowd. Rowan stood beside Lydia, his throat tight with emotion he couldn't quite name. "Why?" Lydia managed to ask. "Why would you all risk this?" "Because we're tired of being afraid," Mrs. Sullivan said, climbing down from her wagon. "Because watching you stand up to Callister reminded us we used to have spines. And because if we don't stand together now, we'll fall separately later. It's that simple." Cooper was already unloading lumber, his weathered face set with purpose. "Besides, a barn raising's a tradition. About time we remembered what tradition means." More wagons kept coming through the morning. The blacksmith arrived with metal hardware and new tools. Mrs. Chen brought food enough to feed an army. Doc Sterling came with medical supplies, eyeing Rowan's burns with professional concern. Even Henry Walsh appeared, looking nervous but determined, carrying the official land office seal. "In case Callister tries anything legal while we're here," Walsh explained, "I can certify the rebuilding as legitimate improvement of documented property. Makes it harder for him to claim abandonment or neglect." By mid-morning, the yard was organized chaos. Men were measuring and cutting lumber, digging post holes, framing walls. Women had set up a cooking area, preparing food while watching children who ran and played with June, suddenly surrounded by friends. Thomas worked alongside the men, his face glowing with pride as they treated him as an equal, asking his opinion, letting him help make decisions about placement and design. Rowan found himself working beside Cooper, raising a wall frame. The older rancher glanced at him sidelong as they worked. "You know Callister won't take this lying down," Cooper said. "Helping her is one thing. Showing up in force like this, making a public statement, that's something else entirely." "I know," Rowan said, "but maybe that's what's needed. He's been able to pick people off one at a time because everyone was isolated. This changes that equation." "Changes it how? He's still got 40 men and the territorial judge in his pocket. But he doesn't have legitimacy anymore. What we did yesterday at the land office, what's happening here today, it's all public now. People are watching, witnesses everywhere. He can't just make people disappear without questions being asked." Rowan drove a nail home with 3 solid strikes. "We're taking away his invisibility, making him do his dirty work in daylight where everyone can see." Cooper grunted, considering this. "You're either very smart or very stupid. Haven't decided which yet." "Could be both," Rowan said with a slight smile. By noon, the barn's frame was up, a skeleton of fresh timber that smelled of pine and possibility. They broke for lunch, everyone gathering in the yard to eat and rest. Lydia moved through the crowd, thanking people, her eyes bright with tears she kept blinking back. Father Mackenzie blessed the food, then blessed the work, then blessed the courage it took to stand against injustice. That's when the riders appeared. Callister came with 20 men this time, nearly half his crew, all of them armed. They formed a line at the edge of the property, an intimidating wall of horses and weapons and hostile intent. The barn raising fell silent, everyone turning to watch. Callister sat his horse at the center, his face dark with fury. His eyes swept the crowd, cataloging faces, marking who had dared to defy him. When he spoke, his voice carried across the yard with cold precision. "This is private property," he announced. "You're all trespassing on land that's under legal dispute. I'm ordering you to disperse immediately." "This is Mrs. Brecker's legally documented land," Father Mackenzie called back, stepping forward. "We're helping a neighbor in need. There's no law against that." "There's a law against interfering with a legitimate land claim. I filed my claim before hers was renewed. That makes her the one trespassing, not me." Callister's smile was razor thin, and everyone helping her is aiding a squatter. That's a criminal offense. Henry Walsh stepped forward, then, holding up his official stamp. "That's incorrect, Mr. Callister. Mrs. Brecker's claim was on file long before yours, as you well know. Your claim disputes an established holding, which places the burden of proof on you, not her. These people are on legal property, helping a legal landowner. You're the one who needs to leave." "You're making a mistake, Walsh," Callister said, his voice dropping to something dangerous. "A career-ending mistake." "Maybe," Walsh said, his voice shaking but his stance firm. "But it's my mistake to make, and I'm making it with clear eyes and a clear conscience." Rowan had moved to the front of the crowd, his hand near his revolver. He could see Davis among Callister's men, and several others from the previous confrontations. They all looked eager for violence, hands on weapons, waiting for the word. "You've got a choice here, Callister," Rowan said clearly. "You can ride away and fight this legal, or you can try to force the issue with 20 men against 30-plus witnesses, including a priest, a doctor, and a land office agent. But if you choose violence, everyone here will testify about what happened. The territorial marshal will have to investigate. Your judge friend won't be able to protect you from that many witnesses. So what's it going to be?" Callister's face had gone red, a vein throbbing in his temple. Rowan could see him calculating, weighing his rage against pragmatism. Finally, he turned to Davis. "Ride to town. Send a telegram to Judge Morrison. Tell him we need an immediate hearing on the Brecker land dispute. Tell him there's a mob situation developing and we need legal clarity." He looked back at Rowan. "You want to play this legal? Fine. We'll see how legal holds up against reality." He wheeled his horse and rode off, his men following. But as they left, Davis turned back and called out, "Enjoy your barn raising, folks. Real shame if something happened to it after you all went home." The threat hung in the air like smoke. When Callister's men disappeared over the rise, the crowd erupted in nervous conversation. Some people looked frightened, ready to pack up and leave. Others looked angry, more determined than before. "He's right about one thing," Cooper said grimly. "We can build this barn, but we can't guard it every night. Soon as we leave, he'll burn it again." "Then we don't leave," Mrs. Sullivan said. "Some of us stay. Take shifts. Keep watch." "For how long?" someone asked. "We all have our own places to tend, our own families to protect." "Until the hearing," Father Mackenzie said. "Walsh, how long until Judge Morrison can get here?" 3 days, maybe 4. He's in Helena, has to travel." "Then we guard for 4 days," the priest said firmly. "We organize watches, make sure someone's always here. It's not forever, just long enough to get this settled legal." The debate continued, but gradually a plan emerged. Families with homesteads nearby would take night watches in rotation. Those from farther away would contribute supplies or money to pay for hired guards. Mrs. Chen offered to coordinate food deliveries. Doc Sterling said he'd stay on the property to provide medical care if needed. Even Walsh, emboldened by his public stand, offered to camp here with his official seal to document any attempted intimidation. By evening, the barn's walls were up and the roof beams in place. It wasn't finished. They'd need another day or 2 for the roof itself and the interior work, but it was far enough along that burning it would be harder. More importantly, it stood as a symbol of collective defiance, proof that Callister couldn't simply terrorize people into submission. As the sun set, most of the crowd departed, but a dozen stayed behind. Cooper and 2 of his ranch hands, Father Mackenzie, Doc Sterling, Walsh, and several townsmen who'd drawn the first night watch. They set up camps around the property, establishing sight lines and rotating positions. Lydia fed everyone she could, stretching their supplies until Mrs. Chen's deliveries arrived. Thomas helped organize the watch rotations, taking his new responsibilities seriously. June, exhausted by the day's excitement, fell asleep in her mother's arms before full dark. Late that night, after June was in bed and Thomas had finally been convinced to sleep, Lydia and Rowan stood together outside the half-built barn, looking at what had been accomplished. "I still can't believe they came," Lydia said softly. "All those people, risking Callister's anger, just to help us." "They weren't just helping us," Rowan said. "They were helping themselves. Sometimes people need someone to be first, to show them it's possible to resist. You were first. They're following." "We were first," she corrected, taking his hand. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." "Sure you could have. You were fighting long before I arrived." "Fighting? Yes. But losing. You changed the odds." She leaned against him, tired and scared, but also hopeful in a way she hadn't been in months. "When this is over, when the judge rules in our favor and Callister finally backs down, I want to ask you something properly, with intent and meaning. But not until we're safe." "I'll wait," Rowan said, though his heart was pounding. He knew what she was asking, what she couldn't quite say yet, and he knew his answer would be yes. The next 3 days passed in a strange mixture of tension and community. Work continued on the barn, the roof went on, then the stalls and interior walls. More people came each day, some just to help for a few hours, others to bear witness, to be part of something larger than themselves. Margaret Pierce from the newspaper came daily, documenting everything, interviewing people, building a public record that would be hard to dispute. Callister's men rode by periodically, watching from a distance but never approaching. The constant presence of witnesses seemed to hold them at bay, though everyone knew it was a temporary deterrence. The real test would come at the hearing. On the fourth day, Judge Morrison arrived, a stern-faced man in his 60s with gray mutton chops and calculating eyes. He sat up in the town hall, announcing that the hearing would begin immediately. Both parties were to present their evidence, and he would render a decision by evening. The town hall filled beyond capacity, people standing along the walls and crowding the doorway. Lydia sat at the front with Rowan beside her, their documents spread before them. Across the aisle, Callister sat with his lawyer, a slick man from Helena named Garrison, who wore an expensive suit and carried himself with aggressive confidence. Judge Morrison called the hearing to order, then looked directly at Callister. "This is your claim, Grant. Present your case." Garrison stood, laying out Callister's argument with practiced ease. The survey had been conducted by a man whose certification had expired. The water rights were ambiguous at best. John Brecker's death had interrupted the 5-year habitation requirement, making the claim incomplete. The property should revert to open filing, which Callister's prior claim should then supersede. It was a masterwork of legal manipulation, taking truths and twisting them just enough to create doubt. Rowan watched Judge Morrison's face and couldn't read whether the man was actually considering the arguments or just going through motions before ruling as Callister had paid him to rule. Then it was their turn. Lydia stood, her voice shaking at first but growing stronger as she spoke. She presented every piece of documentation, original filings, survey maps with Benjamin Morrison's valid certification, receipts showing continuous tax payments, affidavits from neighbors confirming 6 years of habitation and improvement. She spoke about her husband's dreams, about building a home for their children, about the law that was supposed to protect people who did everything right. When she finished, Father Mackenzie stood as a character witness, testifying to the Brecker family's legitimacy and commitment. Walsh provided official land office confirmation that every legal requirement had been met. Doc Sterling testified that he'd treated John Brecker in this very cabin, confirming continuous habitation up until his death. Then Margaret Pierce stood with her newspaper articles reading into the record the public documentation of Callister's intimidation attempts. The burned barn, witnessed by dozens. The threats, heard by many. The pattern of acquiring land through fear rather than honest purchase. "These are serious accusations," Judge Morrison said, his expression unreadable. "They're documented facts," Margaret replied calmly. "I have witnesses willing to testify under oath to every incident." Callister's lawyer tried to object, to discredit witnesses, to argue technicalities, but the weight of evidence and public testimony was overwhelming. Even a corrupt judge would have trouble ignoring this many people telling the same story. Finally, Judge Morrison called for a recess. He disappeared into a back room, and the waiting began. An hour passed, then 2. The crowd grew restless, nervous energy building. Rowan held Lydia's hand, feeling her trembling beside him. When Judge Morrison finally returned, his face was grave. He sat, arranged his papers, and looked out at the packed hall. "I've reviewed all evidence and testimony," he said formally. "This is my ruling. The Brecker claim to Section 12 of Willow Creek is valid and properly documented. Benjamin Morrison's surveyor certification was current at the time of the survey, and his work meets all territorial standards. The habitation requirement was fulfilled prior to John Brecker's death, and his widow's continuation of the homestead constitutes ongoing legitimate use. The water rights are clearly established by prior claim and continuous use." He paused, and Rowan felt Lydia's hand tighten in his. Mr. Callister's competing claim is denied as disputing an established legal holding without sufficient cause. Furthermore, I'm troubled by the testimony regarding intimidation and property destruction. While this hearing isn't a criminal trial, I'm recommending that the territorial marshal investigate these allegations. If they're substantiated, criminal charges may be appropriate. Callister shot to his feet. "That's absurd. You can't—" "I can, and I have," Morrison said sharply. "My ruling stands. The Brecker property is legally and rightfully owned by Lydia Brecker. Any further interference will be considered criminal trespass and harassment. This hearing is concluded." The hall erupted. People cheering, Callister shouting at his lawyer, his men looking uncertain and angry. Lydia collapsed into Rowan's arms, sobbing with relief. Thomas and June pushed through the crowd, and suddenly they were all holding each other, a tangle of family and joy and disbelief that they'd actually won. Father Mackenzie was beaming, Mrs. Sullivan was crying, Cooper was shaking his head in amazement. Even Henry Walsh was smiling, looking 10 years younger without the weight of fear crushing him. Callister stormed out, his men following, but Rowan noticed something important. Several of Callister's crew didn't follow. They stayed behind, talking quietly among themselves, looking at their former bosses retreating back with expressions that said they were reconsidering their employment. That night, the celebration at the homestead was spontaneous and joyful. Someone brought a fiddle. Someone else brought whiskey. And people who'd been living in fear for years danced in the yard like children. The half-finished barn was christened with laughter and music, blessed not just by a priest, but by the community that had built it together. Rowan found himself pulled into a dance by Mrs. Chen, then by Mrs. Sullivan, then by Margaret Pierce, who stepped on his feet repeatedly while laughing. But it was Lydia he kept returning to, Lydia whose eyes found his across the firelight, Lydia who smiled at him with something beyond gratitude, something that looked like love. Late in the evening, when the crowd had thinned and the children were asleep, Lydia took Rowan's hand and led him away from the celebration, down to the creek where the water whispered over stones and the stars wheeled overhead. "I want to ask you now," she said, turning to face him, "before I lose my nerve or reality sets back in. Rowan Hale, would you consider staying here permanently? Not as hired help, not as a guest, but as—" She took a breath. "As my husband? As a father to Thomas and June? As a partner in this life we're building?" Rowan felt his throat tighten, emotions overwhelming him that he'd thought the war had burned away. "Lydia, I have nothing to offer you. No money, no land of my own. You have yourself," she interrupted. "Your strength, your courage, your kindness. The way you see people for who they are, not what they own. The way you ran into a burning barn because you couldn't stand hearing animals suffer. The way you taught my son to be proud of his work and made my daughter feel safe again." She stepped closer. "That's everything I need. That's everything we need. So yes or no, Rowan Hale? Will you stay?" "Yes," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Yes, I'll stay, for however long you'll have me." She kissed him then, gentle at first, then deeper, sealing a promise that transcended words. When they finally pulled apart, both were crying and laughing at the same time. "We should probably tell the children," Lydia said. "Probably." But neither moved, content for the moment to stand together by the water that had caused so much trouble and would now water their shared future. They were married a month later in a ceremony at the church, with what seemed like the entire town in attendance. Thomas stood as best man, solemn and proud in his father's old suit that Lydia had altered to fit. June scattered wildflowers with more enthusiasm than accuracy, delighting everyone. Father Mackenzie performed the ceremony, speaking about courage and community, and the families we choose as well as the ones we're born to. Rowan wore a new shirt that Mrs. Chen had insisted on gifting him, though he kept his old cavalry coat nearby, unable to quite abandon that piece of his past. Lydia wore a dress of pale blue, the same color as the Montana sky, with wildflowers woven into her honey-colored hair. When Father Mackenzie asked if anyone objected to the union, there was a moment of tension, everyone remembering Callister, wondering if he'd make one last attempt to disrupt their happiness. But the church doors stayed closed, and the moment passed. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Father Mackenzie said with a broad smile. "Rowan, you may kiss your bride." And he did, to thunderous applause, and June's delighted squealing and Thomas's embarrassed grin. When they walked back down the aisle together, Rowan saw faces he'd come to know and value. Cooper and Walsh and Doc Sterling and Margaret Pierce and a dozen others who'd stood with them against power and fear. The reception lasted until dark, with more food than they could eat and more goodwill than they could measure. People gave gifts, practical things like tools and seeds and livestock, but also more precious things like friendship and respect and the promise of help when needed. As the sun set and guests began heading home, Rowan stood with his new family outside their rebuilt barn. The structure was complete now, better than the original, built with care and community investment. The cattle were fat on summer grass. The garden was flourishing. The cabin had been painted, the threatening message scrubbed away and covered with fresh color. "Papa," June said, testing out the word for the first time, and Rowan's heart clenched. "Will you tell us a story?" "What kind of story?" "A happy one. With a good ending." Rowan picked her up, settled her on his shoulders, while Thomas leaned against his side and Lydia took his free hand. Together, they looked out at the land that was now theirs, all of theirs, legally and rightfully and completely. "Once upon a time," Rowan began, "there was a cowboy who thought he'd lost everything in the war. He drifted for a long time, looking for something he couldn't name. Then one day, he saw a woman hanging laundry while her children played, and he knew he'd found what he'd been searching for. He found a family. He found a home. He found a reason to stop running and start building instead." "Did he live happily ever after?" June asked. Rowan looked at Lydia, saw her smiling through tears, saw Thomas watching him with trust and affection, felt June's small arms wrapped around his head. He thought about the long road that had brought him here, about the pain and loss and loneliness that had seemed like they'd never end. He thought about how close he'd come to riding past this place without stopping, to missing all of this entirely. "Yes," he said firmly, "yes, they all lived happily ever after, because they chose to fight for each other, because they built something worth keeping, because they learned that family isn't just blood, it's also choice and commitment and showing up every day even when it's hard." "That's a good story," June said, satisfied. "The best one I know," Rowan agreed. The days turned to weeks, the weeks to months. Spring became summer, became autumn. Rowan taught Thomas everything he knew about ranching and building and survival. He learned from Lydia about books and history and the kind of patience that came from years of making a home. He played with June, built her a swing, told her stories, and discovered that fatherhood suited him in ways he'd never imagined. The cattle thrived. The harvest was good. They hired a hand to help with the work, a young man named Peter who reminded Rowan of himself at that age, lost and looking for direction. Rowan gave him the same chance Lydia had given him and watched the boy flourish under structure and purpose. Callister left them alone. Whether from fear of legal consequences, loss of reputation, or simple realization that this particular battle wasn't worth fighting, he turned his attention elsewhere. Rumors said he was selling off parts of his ranch, that several of his men had quit, that his influence in territorial politics had waned. The community that had stood together against him remained vigilant, but the threat had passed. When winter came and Lydia announced she was pregnant, Rowan felt joy so intense it bordered on terror. He'd be a father again, not just in name, but in truth. A child who would never know he hadn't been there from the beginning, who would grow up in a home built on love and sacrifice and the courage to stand against injustice. The baby came in early spring, a boy with Lydia's eyes and a voice that could wake the dead. They named him Silas John Hale, Silas for Rowan's lost brother, John for the man whose dreams they were continuing. Rowan held his son for the first time in the cabin where he'd once been a stranger asking for water, in the home that had become his in ways he still couldn't quite believe. Thomas and June crowded close to see their new brother, their excitement palpable. Lydia watched from the bed, exhausted and radiant, smiling at the family she'd somehow kept together through sheer determination and grace. "He's perfect," Thomas said in awe. "He's tiny," June said skeptically. "He's ours," Rowan said, his voice thick with emotion. "All of us together. A family." Outside, the Montana spring was painting the world in green and gold. The creek ran full with snowmelt, watering land that was now documented and defended and secure. The barn stood solid against the sky, testament to community and resistance. The cattle grazed peacefully in meadows bordered by fences that would hold. And in that cabin, in that moment, a cowboy who'd thought he'd lost everything held his newborn son and realized he'd found everything instead. Not through drifting or running or giving up, but through the simple act of stopping when he saw something worth staying for. Through the window, Rowan could see their land stretching out. Not vast like Callister's ranch had been, but enough. Enough for cattle and crops and children to grow. Enough for a future that honored the past while building something new. Enough for a man to call his own and fight to keep and pass on to his children when the time came. "What are you thinking?" Lydia asked softly. Rowan looked at her, at their children, at the life they'd built from ashes and determination. "I'm thinking about that day I rode up and saw you hanging laundry. How different everything would be if I just kept riding. How close I came to missing all of this." "But you didn't keep riding," she said. "You stopped. You stayed. You fought." "We fought," he corrected. "All of us together." Baby Silas stirred in his arms, making small sounds that weren't quite crying, just announcing his presence to the world. Thomas reached out to touch his tiny hand, and Silas's fingers wrapped around his brother's thumb with surprising strength. "He's going to be strong," Thomas said. "Like you, Papa." "Like all of us," Rowan said. "That's what family means. We make each other strong." The sun climbed higher, warming the land, and Rowan Hale, no longer a drifter, no longer alone, no longer searching for something he couldn't name, held his family close and felt finally and completely at home. The cowboy had met the woman hanging laundry and seen a family he wanted to call his own. And through fire and fear and fighting for what mattered, that's exactly what he'd done.